I've always believed that the truest measure of strength is invisible to the eye. To anyone glancing at our home, our life seemed ordinary, barely adequate, even. The paint on the walls had faded years ago, and the furniture creaked with stories of decades past. My children, sharp-eyed and lively, saw only what was in front of them: worn shoes, patched sweaters, and a pantry that never seemed full enough. They did not know that beneath the surface, every choice I made was deliberate, every limitation a quiet strategy designed to shape them, protect them, and prepare them for a life I could foresee, but they could not. Morning always began the same way. The alarm clock buzzed at 6:30, its tinny sound cutting through the stillness of the small apartment. I rose, careful not to disturb my youngest, who still believed in the magic of sleeping late on weekends. Breakfast was humble: oatmeal sweetened with a pinch of sugar, a few slices of bread, maybe an egg if the market had been kind. I watched them push their chairs back, grumbling softly about the boring food, the cheap cups, the mismatched dishes. Yet even in their complaints, there was a rhythm I had grown to understand. Their dissatisfaction, though sharp, was fleeting, like a spark that revealed the darkness around it more clearly. My eldest, Anna, had a keen eye for contrast. She noticed the holes in her socks, the threadbare sleeves of her jacket, and the faded backpack that had traveled with her through 2 school years. "Mom," she said one morning, voice tight with exasperation, "why can't we have nice things like everyone else?" I paused, ladling oatmeal into bowls, and I looked at her, seeing the impatience and the yearning. "Because, my love," I said gently, "sometimes what everyone else wants isn't what will help you most." She rolled her eyes, muttering about fairness, and I let her frustration pass, like clouds over the sun, knowing that one day she would understand that fairness was not measured by appearances. There were small victories hidden in our modesty, moments of clever planning that went unnoticed by my children. I bought clothes a season early, well before trends caught on, and found ways to mend and patch items so they would last longer than anyone could predict. I cooked meals with ingredients from discounted markets and local farmers who trusted me with their surplus. Every penny saved was a seed planted for a future they could not yet imagine. And yet, to them, I was just being cheap. Their laughter and complaints were constant reminders that appearances mattered more to their young hearts than strategy or foresight. The children's friends sometimes visited, and with each visit, the contrast became sharper. Shoes that had lost their shine, couches that sagged in the middle, and the chipped dining table became objects of whispered comparisons. "Why don't you have brand new things?" one friend asked bluntly, tilting their head in confusion. Anna flushed, her face hot with embarrassment. I smiled, letting the moment pass without correction. Sometimes, silence teaches better than explanation. I watched as they left, their polite goodbyes masking the unspoken judgments of what they perceived as a poor household. And all the while, I carried the quiet knowledge that we were not poor at all. We were simply living in a way that the world outside could not yet comprehend. Afternoons were for work and lessons, chores and errands. I taught them more than homework. I taught them resilience. When a pipe leaked in the kitchen, I repaired it myself, letting them watch me measure, cut, and tighten. They groaned, seeing their Saturday plans vanish, but they were learning something far more important than the weekend's freedom. That self-reliance mattered more than convenience. That skill was more valuable than superficial luxury. When neighbors asked if I needed help, I declined politely, insisting that I had it handled. They nodded, some with curiosity, others with pity, and I welcomed the teaching moment without announcing it as such. Evenings were our quietest time. We shared stories around a table that could barely seat us all comfortably, and I listened to their complaints about school, friendships, and injustices I could not immediately fix. I let them speak, occasionally offering guidance, sometimes only a nod, showing them that respect and attention could weigh more than gifts or indulgences. Yet there were moments when subtle signs of what lay beneath our modest exterior slipped through. The small notes I tucked into their lunchboxes with words of encouragement, the unexpected treats I left hidden in kitchen drawers, the tiny savings jars they had never noticed, but that quietly accumulated toward their education and security. These were acts of love they mistook for eccentricity or frugality. At night, after the children slept, I moved silently through our apartment, counting, checking, and planning. Bills were stacked neatly, grocery lists adjusted for savings and opportunities, and small investments monitored quietly on my laptop. Each decision carried weight, each choice a layer of protection and preparation for a future I had already envisioned. While the world might have seen a parent struggling to make ends meet, I was orchestrating a quiet symphony of security and foresight. My children were unaware that their perception of poverty was a carefully crafted lens through which I shielded them from unnecessary worry. There were days when their frustration pierced me, when Anna or her younger brother muttered under their breath about our supposed lack, and I felt the ache of being misunderstood. But then I would remember the moments of brilliance and kindness that lay beneath the surface. The time I managed to fund a school trip without them noticing, the extra books I purchased secondhand for their studies, the lessons in budgeting disguised as simple errands. These small acts were seeds I had planted in secret, knowing that one day they would bloom into understanding, gratitude, and perhaps even awe. The suspense of their eventual realization carried me through each day. I knew that the hidden life I curated, our carefully disguised wealth and preparation, would one day surface, not as a gift, but as a revelation. And I cherished the tension of that future moment, watching them squirm and complain in the present while I silently laid the groundwork for lessons in humility, responsibility, and gratitude. Through it all, I remained steadfast, balancing love with discipline, simplicity with foresight, and humility with quiet authority. I was both the guardian of their present frustrations and the architect of their future security. In every worn sweater, in every patched shoe, in every modest meal, there lay a story they could not yet read, a story of strength, wisdom, and the deliberate choices that shielded them from unnecessary fear while preparing them for a world far larger and more challenging than they could imagine. Even as their impatience mounted, I noticed the subtleties of their growth. Moments of generosity, like when Anna shared her only candy with a friend who had none, revealed that the seeds I planted in silence were beginning to take root. Their character, shaped by perceived limitations, was slowly being molded into resilience and empathy. And though they grumbled and whispered about poverty, they were learning lessons in integrity, gratitude, and foresight without ever realizing it. In that balance, the tension between what they saw and what I hid, between their irritation and my calm resolve, our life found its rhythm. I was the silent navigator, steering them through the storms of youth while keeping the treasures of tomorrow just out of sight. Every complaint, every embarrassed glance, every whispered comparison to other families became a thread in the tapestry I was weaving, one that, when finally revealed, would teach them that true wealth is measured not by appearances, but by wisdom, foresight, and love. And so, in our small apartment with its faded walls and creaking furniture, the stage was set. The children continued their daily grumbles, oblivious to the careful orchestration behind every choice I made. Yet in every moment, in every patch, in every quiet act of hidden preparation, the suspense grew. The day would come when they would finally understand. When that day arrived, their perception of poverty would shatter, and with it, the realization that the life I had led, so simple, so modest, so deliberately unassuming, was not one of lack, but one of extraordinary love and foresight. I had always known this day would come, though I never could predict exactly how. My children, who had spent their lives poking at every corner of our modest home, comparing us silently to others, and whispering about our poverty, were about to stumble upon a truth I had spent decades carefully concealing. It began with Anna, my eldest, rummaging through the small study I had barely furnished. She had been searching for her old school notebooks, but her fingers brushed against a hidden folder tucked behind the bookshelf. She pulled it free and froze. Inside were documents she could not yet understand, sheets detailing investments, savings accounts, property deeds, and carefully planned trusts. Her eyes widened. "Mom, what is this?" she whispered, holding the papers as if they were fragile relics from another world. I came to her side, my calm demeanor masking the rush of anticipation I felt. "Take your time," I said softly. "Look carefully and try to understand what you see." She hesitated, then called her brother, who had been in the kitchen. Together, they pored over the papers, their brows furrowed, their expressions oscillating between confusion, disbelief, and dawning comprehension. "What all this?" her brother stammered. "But we thought we were poor. All this time you never told us." I nodded, letting them absorb the magnitude of what they had found. Their world tilted on its axis as the facade of simplicity they had taken for granted crumbled before them. I could see the shock morph into a cocktail of emotions: guilt for their previous complaints, awe at the scale of my planning, and a hesitant respect that had never before existed. I guided them through the papers slowly, explaining not the amounts but the principles behind every decision. "I lived simply so that you would never worry about what you could not control," I said. "Every choice I made, every patched sock, every reused dish, every modest meal, was done with your future in mind. These savings, these investments, these plans, they exist so that your choices are never limited by necessity alone." Their silence was almost reverential. The room was heavy with realization. All the arguments about our poverty faded into a quiet, reflective awe. Anna's voice trembled. We had no idea. All those times we complained we were wrong. We judged without knowing." Her brother echoed her sentiment, his usual brashness replaced with humility. "We thought we were missing out, but really, you were protecting us." My heart swelled with a mixture of relief and tenderness. This was the moment I had hoped for, the culmination of years of quiet sacrifice and deliberate restraint. The tension that had defined our home, the contrast between their perception of lack and my hidden strength, now transformed into understanding and gratitude. As I spoke, I revealed smaller secrets, the hidden gestures that had gone unnoticed, the anonymous scholarships I had arranged, the surprise trips paid for in secret, the books and learning materials carefully acquired over the years. "I wanted you to grow with integrity, humility, and patience," I told them. "Not to be spoiled by appearances or immediate gratification, but to understand value, to learn responsibility, and to recognize the difference between what is necessary and what is merely desired." Their eyes glistened, reflecting the magnitude of the lessons they had unwittingly received throughout their youth. There was a palpable shift in the room, a quiet recognition of moral contrasts that had been invisible to them. The temptation of superficial wealth versus the security of thoughtful planning, the impulse to envy versus the discipline of foresight, and the distinction between entitlement and gratitude. They began to ask questions, not about money, but about my decisions. Why I had chosen certain investments, why I had maintained modesty in daily life, why I had never sought recognition or praise for these acts. Each answer was met with growing admiration, a respect that had been absent when they believed themselves poor. Time seemed to stretch as they traced through the history of my careful orchestration. They discovered properties purchased quietly in their names, funds allocated for education, and even charitable contributions meant to instill empathy and generosity. "We thought you didn't have anything," Anna whispered. "But all this, it's more than we could imagine." I smiled softly. "Yes, but it was never about having more. It was about giving you freedom, freedom to choose wisely, to grow, to face the world without fear." The lesson was sinking in. True wealth is not about display, but about preparation, care, and the courage to act unseen. Their reactions evolved as the gravity of the revelation unfolded. Guilt mingled with admiration, and humility replaced their former judgment. I could see it in their gestures, the way they approached me now, seeking guidance rather than challenging my choices. "We were so blind," her brother said quietly. "We judged too quickly. We thought simplicity meant lack, but it was strength. You've given us everything, without ever asking anything in return." The contrast between our earlier frustrations and this newfound respect created a powerful, almost cinematic shift in the household's energy. I encouraged reflection, helping them piece together the puzzle of our life. "All those times you felt frustration, that was part of the learning," I explained. "You learned patience, resilience, and discernment without even realizing it. And when the time came, you discovered that the simple life I led was, in fact, the richest life possible." They nodded, the magnitude of this understanding settling in like sunlight breaking through clouds. The suspense of the years, the tension of perceived poverty, had finally resolved into clarity, gratitude, and awe. We spoke late into the night, recounting memories that now carried double meaning. Every cheap meal, every patched garment, every frugal decision became a story of wisdom and love. The children began to see that what they had mistaken for deprivation had been deliberate shaping, quiet teaching moments intended to instill character and foresight. They laughed softly, sometimes with embarrassment, as they recognized how naive they had been, yet the laughter was intertwined with reverence and newfound appreciation. The revelation did not stop at material discoveries. it extended into deeper moral understanding. They reflected on the value of humility and integrity, seeing the ways I had modeled these virtues without ever demanding acknowledgement. Greed, envy, and entitlement had no place in our home. In their stead, respect, thoughtfulness, and gratitude blossomed. I watched as the lessons I had hoped to impart through subtle, everyday contrasts now crystallized in their awareness, a moment both suspenseful and profoundly rewarding. By the time we sat together in the living room, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The tension of misunderstanding was replaced by a quiet sense of unity and trust. They reached out, holding my hands, their eyes moist with emotion. "We never realized all this was for us," Anna said softly. "You gave us more than we could ever see or ask for, and we were so wrong to complain." Her brother echoed her sentiment, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I nodded, feeling the culmination of decades of careful planning, quiet discipline, and unseen love. In the following days, the revelation shaped our lives in subtle but profound ways. Their behavior changed, guided now by respect and understanding. They began to appreciate the lessons hidden in everyday frugality, and I saw glimpses of foresight, patience, and integrity taking root. I encouraged them to carry these lessons into the wider world, to act with caution, thoughtfulness, and generosity, as they had learned from my example. The suspense of our hidden life had resolved, and in its place was clarity, purpose, and deep familial connection. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that the greatest inheritance I could offer my children was not money alone, but the ability to see beyond appearances, to recognize wisdom hidden in humility, and to act with integrity when faced with life's challenges. They now understood the true value of foresight, courage, and the quiet strength that had guided our lives. And I watched, heart full, as they absorbed these lessons, ready to carry them forward into the future, their gratitude and respect now unwavering. In the final moments of this revelation, we sat together in our modest home, its worn walls now shining with the knowledge of what lay beneath. The laughter, conversation, and quiet contemplation filled the space in a way it never had before. The contrast between perceived poverty and hidden richness, between naivety and understanding, had resolved into a powerful, inspiring truth. Love, wisdom, and careful planning can create a legacy far greater than appearances ever reveal. And in that quiet, emotional resolution, the suspense of years melted into a sense of peace, respect, and lasting familial bond.